Hi there everyone, I hope you're all well and I hope all your families are staying safe. So today's recipe that we're going to be looking at is kale and pesto linguine. This is a really cheap recipe, but it's a really easy recipe and it's a damn tasty recipe. All the things I like: cheap, easy, tasty. So let's crack on, let's make some kale pesto linguine. So first off we need to prepare our kale. I actually prefer whole kale leaves to this shredded stuff, but it seems to be getting harder and harder to find whole kale leaves in any of the supermarkets. It's often this chopped stuff. The chopped stuff makes it a lot more difficult to separate the thick stalks because you're then having to weed through and find the stalks, whereas if it's whole kale you can literally just strip the leaf off and discard the stalk just by running your hand straight along it. So it must be some sort of cost thing that they're doing. This is the way they're going forward. When it comes to the stalks, they're not good at all for the meal, so just take and discard them in your compost recycling type bin. Any of the stalks at all, it doesn't really matter whether they're the thin ones or the big fat ones as I'm trying to show you here. Get rid of them babies. And once we have our kale ready, it's time for the garlic cloves. We're looking for 4 cloves of garlic. I'm using frozen ones here. Use fresh, use whatever's easiest for you to access. Fresh, as I've said before, does always taste better, but frozen can be useful. The reason I'm showing you 5 here is one of them is a brown bit that needs removed. Therefore, there's 5 because it's a small one and one that's got a brown bit. It's going to take me down to about 4 cloves, even though I showed you 5. And as I'm showing you here, any brown bits, which you get on fresh, which you get on frozen, it doesn't really matter what your garlic is, take and remove it until you've got clean, cream looking garlic underneath it. Now, I have discussed this on other videos. Garlic sticks to your knife when you're chopping and mincing it. I have saw it claimed that a little bit of table salt, not too much, but a little bit of table salt helps prevent that sticking. And I've said on other videos before, I'm still on the fence. I do think as it gets smaller, as you're starting to get it minced, it does prevent some sticking, but I don't think it makes a major difference when the cloves are still quite full sized. When your chopped garlic is still of a reasonable size, but as it gets smaller, I'm leaning into it might make a difference. That though could be confirmation bias and I'm seeing what I want to see. So trial and error it yourselves, let me know if you do try it and tell me what you thought. Next up we require 100 grams of pine nuts. Seeing as I'm very lucky and the supermarket sells them in 100 gram bags, all you need to do is set the bag aside until we're ready to toast them. So next up we require half a teaspoon of ground nutmeg. Now if you have a way of grinding the nutmeg yourself, I highly suggest you do so. There's 2 good reasons for this. Freshly ground nutmeg is far more fragrant, far more flavoursome, and it's substantially cheaper than buying it ground if you buy the whole cloves and then grind them yourself. So if you've got a machine that allows you to grind your nutmeg, do so. Assuming you are going to grind your own nutmeg, when it comes to getting it out of your grinding machine and into one of your bottles, the easiest way to do it is to actually just pour it into a funnel so that the powders get a nice large opening to go into. You will find some of it in the process of grinding it has sort of bound together. Don't worry, give your jar a shake and it will start coming apart. And as mentioned earlier, it's half a teaspoon we need, which we can now put in a ramekin until it's required for use. And to the same ramekin, we're now going to add 1 teaspoon of table salt, followed by half a teaspoon of ground black pepper. And next up is our soft cheese. In this instance I'm using mascarpone cheese, but you could use a cream cheese or a ricotta cheese if that's what you've got. What I'm lucky about is that this tub comes in 250 gram packets and we need 125, so you're literally just taking and halving it by slicing down the middle and putting 1/2 in your bowl, and your other half you can set aside and use for something else. And the next cheese that we're looking to prepare is our Parmesan-Style Cheese. We're looking for 100 grams of it, finely grated, which I've already done here, so I'm just taking it out of my tub and measuring out the 100 grams that we require. And now that the prep work is out the way, we can get on with the process of actually cooking the meal. So the first thing we're looking to do is to toast our pine nuts. Set your heat to medium-low and allow your pan to get to that temperature. Then just add the nuts directly to the pan with nothing else in the pan. Now it needs to be either a stainless steel or an iron pan you're using here, a non-stick pan, and they will not toast properly. They toast far better on either iron or stainless steel. So as I said, medium-low heat, and then as soon as you've put the nuts in, move them all around so that the natural oils on the nuts themselves actually grease the bottom of the pan slightly. We don't need anything else there, the natural oils will do the job for us. And once we have moved the nuts around enough, it's safe enough to leave them for a few seconds and then move them, leave them for a little bit and then move them, and continue that process until they're browned up really nice. Now be careful not to put your temperature too high. It's easy to burn them if the temperature's too high, but you can get a really lovely roasting on them if the temperature's at that correct area of medium, just below medium. And rather than showing you the whole process, which would be a bit tedious because it takes a good few minutes, let's jump to the end where we can see where the nuts have been browned off lovely, and then we're going to take and we're going to grind these down. So once we have this deep colour that you see on the nuts here, we want to take and we want to add them directly to a food processor with a blade attachment. And we are then going to take and whiz them at a high speed until we've got a lovely pine nut paste. It doesn't take long, a minute and a half, 2 minutes, maybe slightly longer. Now if any of the nuts are still whole and sticking to the side of your food processor, just go in with a spatula, knock them off the side, and then give it another whiz until everything's nice and smooth. Now once cooked, we are going to be adding our kale to our food processor, so just go in and break up any of the pine nut paste that's welded to the bottom of the food processor, just so that everything mixes together lovely when the kale is added. So in a medium-large pan, we're going to add a little bit of salt. 1 teaspoon is generally about the right amount, and a splash of oil, just getting ready for cooking our pasta. And to a large non-stick saute pan or similar natured type of pan, we're going to add 2 tablespoons of olive oil. And now to the food processor, which still holds our pine nut paste, we're going to add our grated Parmesan-Style Cheese. And next up to the food processor, we're going to add our 125 grams of Mascarpone Cheese, or similar nature cheese if you went with one of the other options that I mentioned to you. And next up, we're looking to add our spice and seasoning. So that's the nutmeg, the salt, and the ground black pepper that we've got set aside in the ramekin. And from there, we want to take our processor bowl back over onto its base, and we're going to whiz this for about a minute or two until everything's broken down and it's lovely and blended together. Next up, we want to bring our saute pan up to a medium-high heat, and at the same time start heating the cold water in our pasta pot and bring it towards the boil. And once our saute pan is warm enough, we're going to add roughly half the kale, as close as we can possibly get to half of that pile of kale. And as soon as we have our first batch of kale in the pan, we're going to take and we're going to add our minced garlic to it as well. And then with a spatula, give the garlic a stir into the kale so it's thoroughly mixed through. Some bits will be directly on the pan, other bits will be mixed into the kale. That's A-OK. And once thoroughly mixed, we're going to cover with a lid and cook for around 5 towards 6 minutes, stirring once or twice just to make sure all the kale is fully wilted over the time. And once we're halfway through our first batch of kale, hopefully our water should be now at the boil and we can add our pasta and start cooking it. Now give your linguine a few seconds, maybe 15-20 seconds, just for the bottoms to get soft, and then we're going to turn it and we're going to twist the full length of the linguine into our boiling water. And once the water comes back to a boil, we're then going to cook the pasta for 10 minutes, assuming you want it al dente, which is with a bit of bite, and 12 minutes for a softer mouthfeel. And at this point, don't forget about your kale. Come back, give it another swirl around just to make sure it's thoroughly mixed and all the leaves are wilting evenly. And once the kale's been thoroughly mixed, jump back to your pasta with your tongs and give it a good move about, just so that all the pasta lengths have completely broken apart from each other, because you don't want clumped pasta and end up with hard bits. So just go in with the tongs and move it apart. And our first batch of kale should now be ready. Be careful when you're taking the lid off. You don't want to catch a blast of steam and end up with a scald. It's not likely, but it can happen. So again, kale, transfer it over into our food processor bowl, which we're then going to whiz until we've got everything blended together into a lovely smooth sauce. However, before we take it over, we need to get our next batch of kale on. Now check your pan. If it's became too dry, add a small splash of extra olive oil on top of the 2 tablespoons we initially had, and we're going to add the rest of our kale, and we're going to repeat the procedure for 5 or 6 minutes. Cover with a lid, stir once or twice as the time ticks down, just to make sure all of the kale is evenly wilted. And whilst that batch of kale is cooking down, we're going to take our food processor over and we're going to give that a whiz until everything's nice and smooth. Pay careful attention to whiz it long enough though to make sure everything's smooth. It's going to be quite a fibrous pesto when we're done, therefore we want to really break it down so that we don't have any lumpy bits of the heavier bits of leaf stalk that might still be in there. And just like previously, do not be afraid to go in with a spatula just to take things off the sides so that it can whiz it again, just to guarantee we're getting everything broken down well. Just don't cut your spatula on the blades though, be careful. And whilst we're whizzing down our first batch in the food processor, don't forget to come back to your kale and give that a good move around the pan. Now, the very observant here will notice I've managed to brown some of the leaves on this batch. Excuses, but it was because I was trying to get the camera set up and it ended up taking too long, and by the time I got back I'd browned some of it. Made almost no difference to the flavour, if any difference to the flavour. Had I burnt a lot more, it probably would have, but a few leaves, a couple of leaves, it was not noticeable. Just don't do what I did. Be quicker. But once your 5 or 6 minutes is up and the kale has been nice and wilted, minus the slightly burnt bits, then just add that to the food processor, and again we're going to whiz it just like we did previously. Now at this point my pasta was also ready, so take that off the heat, drain it in a colander in your sink and just let that sit for a minute or two whilst we get on with whizzing our kale. And back onto the base of the food processor, and as I say, whiz at high speed. This batch will break down faster into our pesto sauce, but it doesn't mean that you still don't need to be careful of any majorly lumpy bits, so just pay attention, and again, if need be, quickly into the sides with a spatula, and then it's ready for serving. Now I find this makes 6 good sized servings. As there's only 3 of us, I'm serving 3 and I'm storing 3, which can be had for another meal on another night. I generally have it the following night, saves you making a fresh meal, and it's still just as damn tasty. And don't forget to garnish it with lavishings of Parmesan-Style cheese. It just finishes the dish off completely with that extra Parmesan on top. So there we go, kale and pesto linguine. Not difficult, as I've said, very easy. It's going to be damn tasty when I get a bite of it. Just don't do what I did. I kind of burnt my kale a little bit when I was trying to sort the camera for the whizzy on the food processor, and by the time I got back it had taken a little bit too long. About every 2 minutes you want to be stirring the kale. It took me about 3.5 minutes, maybe 3 minutes to get back, and by that time the kale on the surface of the pan had started to burn. I don't reckon it'll make too much of a difference to the flavour because it was only a couple of leaves, but be more careful than I was. And yes, accidents happen when you're trying to film YouTube videos and make your dinner and do everything else and answer the phone because the phone went. But anyway, there we go. So, kale, pesto, linguine. It's going to be better than anything you've ever had in a supermarket. Excuse me. Lost a little bit of linguine, and not too large a mouthful for a change. There's a real strength of flavour and texture from this one. As much as we've really processed and whizzed the kale, there's still some fibrous bite to it, which is lovely. You want that little bit of fibrous bite. You've got the mascarpone coming through, and you've got the Parmesan-Style coming through on top of your pasta. I prefer it al dente, which is 10 minutes. You might prefer it a bit softer, but I think al dente really, really works for this. But then again, I think al dente works for everything pasty-wise. So, there we go. Thanks for watching. You folks stay safe. It's a pleasure when I hear from you down below. So please, if you watch it, let me hear from you down below. If you're going to cook it, absolutely let me hear from you down below, because I like feedback when you've made something. Thank you. Stay safe, folks. All the best.